A life for a life. The death penalty debate. The death penalty. It's a topic that sparks heated debate and strong emotions. Some believe it's the ultimate punishment for the most heinous crimes, a way to deliver justice and protect society. Others see it as a barbaric practice, a violation of human rights with no place in a civilized society. In the UK, the death penalty was abolished in 1965. But is there a case for its return? It's a question that continues to divide opinion. This debate isn't just theoretical, it has real-world implications. It forces us to confront fundamental questions about justice, morality, and the role of the state. It's a debate that goes to the heart of who we are as a society. Capital punishment in Britain, a look back. The death penalty, also known as capital punishment, has a long and often gruesome history in the United Kingdom. For centuries, it was used for a wide range of offences. From murder and treason to petty theft and even sheep stealing, executions were often public spectacles drawing large crowds of onlookers. The methods of execution varied over time, but hanging was the most common. Over the years, there were growing concerns about the barbarity of capital punishment and the risk of wrongful convictions. This led to a gradual shift in public opinion. In 1965, the death penalty was finally abolished for murder. It was later abolished for all other offences. Murder most violent crime statistics in the UK. The UK, like any nation, faces its share of crime. Murder, though statistically rare, remains a concern. According to the Office for National Statistics, there were 696 homicides in England and Wales in the year ending March 2022. This represents a slight increase from the previous year, but overall, homicide rates have been trending downwards for several decades. It's important to note that these statistics encompass all forms of homicide, not just premeditated murder. They include crimes like manslaughter, infanticide, and corporate manslaughter. When considering the debate on the death penalty, it's crucial to have a clear understanding of the prevalence and nature of violent crime in the UK. Section 4. Voices for vengeance, arguments for reinstatement. Those who support the reinstatement of the death penalty argue that it's the ultimate deterrent for the most serious crimes. They believe that the fear of execution would make potential criminals think twice before taking a life. They argue that it brings justice to victims and their families, offering a sense of closure and retribution. Another argument put forward is the potential impact on prison overcrowding and the associated costs. Housing prisoners for life is expensive. Proponents of capital punishment argue that it's a more cost-effective solution. By removing the most dangerous criminals from society permanently, they believe it would free up resources for other areas of the justice system. Opponents of the death penalty raise several ethical and practical concerns. At the forefront is the risk of wrongful convictions. No justice system is perfect. There's always the possibility, however small, that an innocent person could be sentenced to death. Once carried out, the death penalty is irreversible. Furthermore, many argue that the death penalty is inhumane and violates the right to life. They believe that the state should not have the power to take a life, regardless of the crime committed. There's also the question of its deterrent effect. Studies have shown mixed results on whether the death penalty actually deters crime. Some argue that it may even have the opposite effect, leading to an increase in violent crime. Section 6. Packed prisons and strained budgets. A crisis unfolding. The UK prison system is facing significant challenges, including overcrowding and budget cuts. Prisons are operating at or near capacity, putting a strain on resources and staff. This has led to concerns about inmate welfare, safety and rehabilitation. The cost of housing a single prisoner is substantial, and the overall cost of the prison system is a significant burden on taxpayers. The debate on the death penalty is often linked to these issues. However, it's important to note that even if the death penalty were reinstated, it's unlikely to have a significant impact on prison overcrowding or budget constraints. This is because the number of death sentences handed down and carried out would likely be very small. GAP 3S, Section 7, International Perspectives on the Death Penalty. The death penalty is a contentious issue worldwide. Some countries, like the United States and China, continue to use it, while others, like Canada and Australia, have abolished it. The reasons for these differences are complex. involving cultural, legal and political factors. Understanding these international perspectives can provide valuable insights into the debate on whether the UK should bring back the death penalty. In the United States, the death penalty remains a divisive topic, with some states actively carrying out executions while others have imposed moratoriums or abolished it entirely. Supporters argue it serves as a deterrent and a form of justice for the most heinous crimes, while opponents highlight the risks of wrongful convictions and the ethical implications. China, on the other hand, is known for its high execution rates, often justified by the government as a necessary measure to maintain social order and combat corruption. The lack of transparency and due process in many cases raises significant human rights concerns. Conversely, countries like Canada and Australia have abolished the death penalty, citing reasons such as the sanctity of human life, the potential for judicial errors, and the ineffectiveness of capital punishment as a deterrent. These nations have found alternative ways to address serious crimes without resorting to the death penalty. By examining these international perspectives, we can better understand the complexities and nuances involved in the death penalty debate. It becomes clear that the decision to reinstate such a measure in the UK is not just a matter of policy, but also one of ethical, cultural and societal values. Gap 3S. As we continue to explore this issue, it's essential to consider these global viewpoints and the lessons they offer. The debate over the death penalty is far from black and white, and understanding the international context can help inform a more nuanced and informed discussion. Gap 3S, Section 8. Psychological impacts of the death penalty. The death penalty not only affects the individual sentenced to death, but also has profound psychological impacts on their families, the victims' families, and even the legal and prison staff involved. Studies have shown that the trauma and stress associated with the death penalty can have long-lasting effects. For the families of those sentenced to death, the experience can be a relentless cycle of hope and despair. They live with the constant dread of losing a loved one, often while navigating a complex and emotionally draining legal system. This ongoing stress can lead to anxiety, depression, and even post-traumatic stress disorder. On the other side, the families of victims face their own emotional turmoil. While some may feel a sense of justice or closure, others report that the execution of the perpetrator does little to alleviate their pain. Instead, it can reopen wounds and prolong their grief, complicating the healing process. Even those who are part of the legal and prison systems are not immune to the psychological impacts. Judges, lawyers, and prison staff involved in capital cases often experience moral and ethical dilemmas, leading to emotional stress and burnout. The act of carrying out an execution can leave lasting scars, with some professionals reporting feelings of guilt and remorse long after the event. These psychological impacts highlight the far-reaching consequences of the death penalty, extending beyond the individuals directly involved. The emotional toll on families, victims, and professionals alike raises important ethical questions about the use of capital punishment as a form of justice. As we reflect on these psychological impacts, it becomes clear that the debate over the death penalty is not just about crime and punishment. It's also about the human cost and the emotional burden carried by those who are left behind. Understanding these psychological dimensions can lead to a more empathetic and informed discussion on whether the UK should reinstate the death penalty. Gap 3S. Gap 3S. Section 9 case studies. Wrongful convictions. People say the death penalty stops crime, that it's the ultimate punishment. But it's way more complicated and dangerous than that. One of the biggest reasons to be against the death penalty is the sad stories of people who were wrongly convicted. These stories show us that even courts can make mistakes, and with the death penalty, those mistakes can't be fixed. Gap 2S. Let's talk about Cameron Todd Willingham. In 1992, in Texas, he was convicted of setting a fire that killed his 3 young children. He always said he was innocent, but he was executed in 2004. Years later, investigations showed that the evidence used against him was totally wrong. Experts now think the fire was an accident. This makes us wonder if Willingham was really guilty, and it shows how bad things can happen when someone is wrongly convicted. Gap 2S. Another really sad story is Anthony Ray Hinton's. He spent almost 30 years on death row in Alabama for 2 murders he didn't do. He was convicted because of bad evidence about bullets and because his lawyer wasn't very good. In 2015, the highest court in the US said he was innocent and he was finally set free. His story shows how bad lawyers and unfairness in the courts can ruin people's lives. Gap 2S. Even the UK has had problems with wrong convictions. Think about the Birmingham Six. In 1975, 6 men were wrongly blamed for bombings done by the IRA. They spent 16 years in jail before they were finally freed in 1991. It turned out the police did bad things and the evidence against them wasn't reliable. The UK got rid of the death penalty in 1965, but the Birmingham Six case shows how scary it is to think what could have happened if it still existed. Gap 2S. These aren't just one-off stories. They show that there are big problems in our justice system. People make mistakes, they can be biased, and sometimes they even do bad things on purpose. All of this can lead to innocent people being convicted. And with the death penalty, you can't undo the mistake. Once someone is executed, they're gone forever. That makes these mistakes even more terrible. Gap 2S. When we think about these wrongful convictions, we see that the death penalty is really risky. The stories of Cameron Todd Willingham, Anthony Ray Hinton, and the Birmingham Six remind us how much is at stake when the justice system makes mistakes. They make us ask, is it ever okay to risk killing an innocent person? Gap 3S. It's important to understand these stories so we can really talk about the death penalty. They make us face the fact that courts aren't perfect, and when someone's life is on the line, the risks are just too big. Gap 3S. Gap 3S. All right, let's talk about how the media, like the news, TV, and the internet, shapes what people think about the death penalty. This is a big one. Section 10, the role of media in shaping public opinion. Gap 2S. Think about it. We see stuff about the death penalty everywhere, from news reports to movies. This can really affect how we see it, whether we think it's good or bad. Gap 2S. News stories often focus on really bad crimes, making them seem even worse. This can make people angry and want the harshest punishment possible, which they might see as the death penalty. This can make it seem like the death penalty is the only way to deal with terrible crimes, which isn't always true. Gap 2S. Documentaries, on the other hand, dive deeper into the issue. They show us things like when innocent people are put on death row, how it affects everyone involved, and the tough moral questions we face. These films try to teach us about the death penalty by showing us real stories and facts that make us rethink what we believe. Gap 2S. Movies and TV shows also play a part. Sometimes they make the death penalty seem like the right thing to do after a crime, but other times they show us the problems with our justice system, making us wonder if the death penalty is really fair or even if it works. Gap 2S. Then there's social media, where things spread like wildfire. Hashtags, videos, and online chats can quickly change what people think. This can create a big divide, with people strongly on one side or the other. Gap 2S. It's clear the media has a big influence, but we need to be careful about what we see and hear. We need to understand how stories can be told to make us feel a certain way. This helps us form our own opinions about this really complicated issue. Gap 2S. So, to wrap things up, the media can teach us things, but it can also twist the truth. It's our job to look at all sides of the story and not just believe everything we see. That's the only way we can really understand the death penalty and everything about it. Gap 3S. Gap 3S. Okay, so we've talked about how the news and TV shows can change how we think about the death penalty. Now let's look at some other options. This is section 11, alternatives to the death penalty. Gap 2S. There are different ways to deal with serious crimes besides the death penalty that can still keep people safe. One thing people talk about a lot is life in prison without parole. This means really bad criminals stay in jail forever and can't get out. It avoids all the tricky stuff about whether the death penalty is right or wrong. Gap 2S. Another idea is something called restorative justice. This is where criminals try to make things right with the people they hurt and the community. They talk about what happened and try to understand each other. It's all about fixing the damage that was done. Gap 2S. We also have programs that help criminals change their lives. These programs help with things like drug problems or mental health issues. They give people the skills they need to follow the rules and be good citizens. Gap 2S. All these different options have good things and bad things about them, but they all have the same goal: to make sure justice is done while being fair to everyone and keeping people safe. GAP 2S. So, when we talk about the death penalty, it's important to think about these other options too. Could they help us build a better and kinder world? GAP 3S. GAP 3S. Hey everyone, and welcome back. So, we've talked a lot about the death penalty, and as you can probably guess, the conversation is far from finished. This is Section 12, the future of the death penalty debate. GAP 2S. Things are always changing, right? Society changes, we learn new things, and all of that affects how we think about the death penalty. New science, what people think, and even politics, it all plays a big part in where this debate goes next. GAP 2S. For example, we're getting much better at using DNA to solve crimes. That means we can be more sure that we've got the right person, which could lead to fewer innocent people being executed. And if that happens, maybe even more people will turn against the death penalty. GAP 2S. Plus, lots of countries are talking more about human rights, and that might convince even more places to get rid of the death penalty completely. GAP 2S. But here's the other side of the coin. Some places might keep the death penalty or even bring it back. Sometimes when really bad crimes happen, people want tougher punishments, and that can push things in the other direction. So the future of this whole debate is going to be a mix of what's right, what's fair, and what keeps people safe. It's complicated. GAP 2S. At the end of the day, we all want justice, and we all want to protect people's rights. That's what's going to keep this conversation going. As we move forward, it's super important to stay informed, keep an open mind, and be a part of the discussion. We need to look at it from all angles. GAP 3S.